great to see you here. My name's Nat Edwards. I'm the Director General and Master of the Royal Armouries, and I'm sort of delighted on behalf of the Royal Armouries to be hosting this evening's event, the Olof Palme Memorial Lecture. Don't worry, I know you're not here to listen to me at all. You're all here very excited about a really exceptional speaker. I just want to do three things really. I wanted to explain why there's an Olof Palme Memorial Lecture very, very quickly. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with that. Why the Royal Armouries is hosting it tonight, along with the organising committee, which comprises Leeds Peace Links, Leeds Beckett University, Council, Leeds CND, and other people who've been much more involved in shaping it over the years. And also why we have a really exceptional speaker tonight. I'll try and do that as quickly as possible. So the Olof Palme Memorial Lecture was founded in Leeds a year after the assassination of Palme by Michael McGowan, MEP, who's here tonight. Fantastic, and it's been something that's been going over the years ever since, to remember somebody who was quite exceptional as a statesman, peace campaigner, and an activist. Why in Leeds? Well, Olof Palme, as many of you might know, studied at Leeds University in the 1950s. But that's a quite parochial reason just to have the lecture here, isn't it? There's something much more universal and global about Palme's work as a peace campaigner. And one of the reasons that I think it's so appropriate to have it here. For a start, he was someone who didn't see peace as something which was about abrogation of conflict, backing away from things. He wasn't a quiet hermit who went off into quiet reflection, but he was somebody who fought for peace and was prepared to confront and challenge, to do business with people who for other people would be considered to be untouchable, but equally to challenge them when that was necessary. He challenged right and left, he challenged activists and revolutionaries, but also he worked with them wherever he could. He had a principle of supporting not just peace, but also liberation and decolonisation. So for him, peace was something that was at times angry and loud and dynamic and joyful and scary and all the things that peace should be if you're going to make it work. Because it's not about just sitting down and talking to people who are like-minded and believe what you believe and finding a comfortable space. It's often forged in the least comfortable places. And that's why the Armouries we're really keen to host something like this. Not just because we feel guilty about all the sort of death and horror and violence that's been carried out by the things that are in the Armouries, all those sort of weapons, not only of war, some for other reasons, but we very much believe that there's no point as a society in having a collection of historical material that gives you that long view of human violence and conflict at the time, unless you're going to learn something from it, unless you're going to do something from it, unless you're going to put yourself in some of those uncomfortable places to learn how to plot a happier and more peaceful future for future generations. So for us, peace isn't about quiet reflection. It's sometimes angry, it's sometimes thrawn, it's sometimes opinionated, but never boring and never dull. And that's the reason why we're really delighted to be welcoming tonight Jeremy Corbyn, who all of you will know has been MP for Islington North since 1983, lifelong activist, lifelong outspoken critic of whichever government was in position, and a lifelong person who understood that if you want to make change happen, you have to go to places that other people don't go, actually. He was the leader, as you know, of the Labour Party from 2015 to 2020, and now is the founder of the Project for Peace and Justice, taking forward his campaign for peace, for social and economic justice, for human rights in Britain and across the world. And this is an exciting time to be welcoming to Leeds, an exciting time, I think, for British politics generally. It doesn't always get reported that way, but for the first time, we have all sorts of voices and all sorts of people in in Parliament who aren't necessarily as aligned to the old way of thinking, old way of doing things. So I'd like you to give a big welcome to our speaker tonight, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Thank you for welcoming us here today. Can I present you with a copy of our book, Poetry for the Many?
Oh.
It's a collection of poetry from all over the world, made initially by Len McCluskey and myself, and then a bit of quality was added when Peak World's chose poems as well. And so we've been doing events all over the country with it, and it's fascinating. A number of people that come just to discuss poetry. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Before we start the event properly, Michael McGowan, you don't get away so lightly. Michael, thank you so much for helping set up tonight and for all you've done for so many people over so many years for peace, justice and humankind. Michael, thank you very much. And to my old friend Dave Webb, thanks for all you do for CND, peace, justice and so on all around the world. Hope you enjoy it. There's what more books you're going to read, shall Fine. Thanks very much for inviting me tonight to give this Olof Palme lecture. To me, it's an enormous honour. And when I got the invitation, I was really bowled over by it, because, as you were saying, talk about Olof Palme's life. It's complicated. He grew up in actually an extremely conservative, right-wing, privileged background, and was privately educated by a tutor at home. And as he often described later in his life, people say, well, what made you a socialist? And he said, well, I went to the USA. And he went to the USA in the post-war period, and it was the class conflicts and the class issues that made him a socialist. And also, he was a very young and very nervous student journalist. He called up United Auto Workers and said, could he interview Walter Reuther, who was an amazing, iconic leader of the Auto Workers Union. And so Olaf went along to see him, thinking, the best he'd get 10 minutes, possibly half an hour. They had a discussion that lasted 5 hours about the history of the Union, the history of the USA, and socialism and social justice. And they became great friends after that. And that was one of the great turning points in his life. And then he went back to Sweden, joined the Social Democratic Workers' Party, and then worked in the party and campaigning and so on, and then eventually twice became Prime Minister of Sweden. One time they had an absolute tie in the election between the Conservatives and Social Democrats, but since the Social Democrats were still in office, they remained in office. And they then argued about everything in Parliament. Occasionally they came to a compromise, but they decided some legislation by drawing lots. And they got to the end of the debate, they put the two positions in a hat and pulled one out, and then they went on from there. And he changed so much in Sweden, increased workers' rights, huge increases in taxation in order to pay for a very comprehensive wraparound social services and social security, which it's under attack for sure, but it's still very much the bedrock of the idea of social justice and social inclusion. It was very much in his doing and his legacy. His role in international affairs was phenomenal. He spoke out very strongly against the Vietnam War, and at one point the US suspended relations with Sweden because of what he had said about the US and its activities in Vietnam. And he was a great campaigner for peace, and he was censured by the Parliament unsuccessfully for going to a demonstration against the Vietnam War as Prime Minister, which they thought was a little odd. I don't think there's anything odd about it at all. I think it's the kind of Prime Minister you want. Somebody's prepared to go out on the streets and protest. Surely isn't that what life's about? And so he then also spent an enormous amount of time, effort, and energy to try to end the horrendous and disastrous Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, unsuccessfully, unfortunately, but he made every possible effort to try to bring about a cessation of that conflict, and just as much as he spoke out against the apartheid regime in South Africa, in support of Allende in Chile, and against Pinochet, and he was a very strong supporter and friend of the Cuban people, and indeed spoke in Cuba and built that friendship up, and was particularly supportive of the movement in El Salvador during the time of the Central American conflicts in the 1980s, which is where I first came into contact with Olof Palme. I went to El Salvador on a number of occasions during the 1980s as a visit with fellow trade unionists, support trade unions in El Salvador. And one of them, we went on the May Day March. I went with some colleagues from the TNG, as it then was, now Unite. And we hadn't got any banners, so we just thought we were just joining the march and going in solidarity. And then, as we arrived at the start point of the march, the organisers came over and said, "Oh, we've got the banner for you." I said, "What banner? We haven't got a banner." They said, "No, we've made one for you." I said, "Okay." So they brought this enormous banner, it's about as wide as this room, and it said, "Los Británicos en solidaridad con el pueblo de El Salvador." Okay, that's fine. So I then sort of rolled up the banner, and me and Larry Smith, who was the other, who was from TNG, went to the back of the march and said, "Okay, we'll march behind in solidarity with all of you." They said, no, you've got to come to the front. I said, "It's your march, it's your May Day, it's your country, it's not me." They said, no, we want you to march to the front. So they were quite adamant about this, and they weren't taking no for an answer. So eventually I said, "Why? This is just ridiculous. You can't have two European blokes marching in front of the people of El Salvador on your May Day." So I said, "What's behind all this?" They said, "Look, they're less likely to shoot you than us." So you guys go at the front. Thanks so much for that. That's good. And then later on, there were two El Salvadorian activists who were in prison in Britain, who were detained by the British government on allegations of spying, which were frankly nonsensical. They were being detained because they were from El Salvador and they were from the left. And I visited them in prison and took up their case. They were in prison in Isle of Wight. I spent a long time with them. They were two really the loveliest guys you'd ever want to meet. And they were very good at painting and wood carving, which they were bizarrely allowed to do in prison. Not the painting, but the wood carving. I thought it was a bit odd, because it requires chisels and swords and all sorts of things. But anyway, they did that. And my late dad was dying of cancer at the time. They made the most beautiful carving for him, which I gave to him. And then, when they came to come out of prison, the government said, "We're going to deport them to El Salvador." I said, "You can't do that. They'll be arrested, imprisoned, and probably killed as soon as they arrive." And so the Home Office said, no, their sentence is up, they've got to go. I said, "No, you can't do that." So we then sort of got legal letters and solicitors and so on, and kept hassling the Home Office beyond belief. And they said, "You've got to find somewhere else for them to go." Right, well, thanks. Well, that's great, because I take up the case, and it's up to me, apparently, to sort out your problems for you. So we then contacted Olof Palme, who was then Prime Minister of Sweden, and asked him if he would be prepared to provide a place of safety for them in Sweden. And we got through, we spoke about it, discussed it, and so on. And he came back, "Yes, we will do that. Thank you, Olof. Absolutely wonderful." And then, the day before they were due to go, Palme was assassinated. so they couldn't go there. And then we had another hassle to try and find somewhere for them to go. And eventually, after more than 2 months of arguing with the Home Office and everybody else, we managed to get them a place of safety in Mozambique, which is where they went to. I've never forgotten that Olof Palme, as Prime Minister, just said straight away, yes, they're in danger, we'll support them. And that's the kind of man he was. And he did so much for peace in so many ways. And in 1982, he published the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues. And it's very interesting because it puts forward the idea that nations and people can only feel safe when their counterparts also feel safe. It emphasised all nations have a legitimate right to security. Military force is not a legitimate means of resolving interstate controversies. Restraint is necessary as an expression of national policy. Security cannot be achieved through military superiority. Reduction and limitations of weapon systems are necessary for common security. And this became known as the Palme Commission, the Palme Commission. And in June 1982, made the following recommendations to the UN. I'll just read them out. Just imagine if that was now. A treaty on mutual troop reductions in Europe. Negotiations on the reduction of strategic weapons START treaty. Establishment of a nuclear weapons-free zone in Europe. Establishment of a chemical weapons-free zone in Europe. A comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty and a treaty on the dismantling of medium-range missiles in Europe. Well, that was 1982. I'm sure many in this room remember those times very well. That was the height of the Cold War. That was the time when Reagan was busy rearming. That's at the time that many of us were opposing Trident being replaced. That was a time of a big growth in the whole idea of nuclear arms bringing about safety for people. And Palme managed to do something very, very different. And I think we should just remember those people that were prepared to risk their own popularity. Remember, he was one of the key opponents of Swedish neutrality, sadly now ended, and make themselves unpopular if necessary in order to try and take risks with peace. And I think we should always remember people like that with reverence and also try and emulate what they were trying to do. So you then ask yourself, how far have we got from realising his vision? Well, last year, UN General Secretary Guterres addressed the General Assembly and announced that the symbolic doomsday clock, you know the one, which measures humanity's proximity to self-destruction, that is the idea that a nuclear holocaust will take place and destroy the whole planet, and it clearly could. And he declared that humanity was perilously close to catastrophe. Guterres named 3 perilous challenges: extreme poverty, accelerating climate crisis, and nuclear war, and said we're at 90 seconds to utter destruction. Now, there was a time when the General Secretary of the UN made a statement. It was listened to all over the world, and countries would actually take some notice and maybe act upon it. Remember, there was a previous Swedish General Secretary of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, who did his best to try and achieve peace in Congo, and died in extremely mysterious circumstances, and some very interesting books been written about him. And so, nuclear weapons are, to me, a core issue and a core subject. And the only time they've been used is in 1945, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as an act of war, although there have been numerous nuclear explosions from testing in the Pacific, in the USA, in the Soviet Union, and in a number of other places. And the damage done by nuclear testing, and those that have died from nuclear testing, not just the British soldiers that were used as guinea pigs in the Pacific, but also the Pacific Islanders who suffered cancers, poverty and destruction because of nuclear testing. And the development of nuclear weapons by the US in the Second World War was supported by a lot of scientists from Britain. And then after the Second World War, Britain developed its own nuclear weapons. Bizarrely, the Attlee government managed to develop its own nuclear weapons in secret without ever telling the Cabinet or Parliament. It spent £200 million, which is a phenomenal amount of money in 1945. And by the late 40s, this weapon was more or less ready. And when Churchill became Prime Minister in 1951, he didn't know anything about it. He was told about it as Prime Minister. So he said to Attlee, I really admire you. I didn't think you had it in you to keep such a secret for so long and develop something that we obviously need. Churchill was well after nuclear weapons. And I think that is something that, to me, is still going to be discussed, the contradiction of the Attlee government between the amazing achievements in domestic policy on the National Health Service, on planning, on public ownership, on housing, social justice and so many other things, with an international policy that continued imperial wars and developed nuclear weapons. I often find it very hard to understand that contradiction. I remember often discussing it with Tony Benn and others who were active in politics at the time, and indeed some who'd been in Parliament at that time. And so, the time when nuclear weapons came nearest to being used was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1963, but that actually had a salutary effect on the rest of the world. I mean, I can remember as a young child that the Cuban Missile Crisis and the feeling that we were all about to be blown up. I didn't fully understand what it was, but as I remember my parents and everybody else being quite alarmed what was going on. That then led to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty signed in 1968, and eventually proposed in 68, eventually signed in 1970. And what it did was separated the world into sheep and goats. The sheep being the rest of the world who didn't have nuclear weapons, and the goats being those that did. Now, that was in a sense a fundamental flaw in the treaty, but probably one that was impossible to avoid for those negotiating it. And what it said was that the declared nuclear weapon states must not sell, pass on or give away nuclear technology, and must not continue the development of their nuclear technology, and should take steps towards disarmament. And all the other signatories to the treaty must agree never to develop nuclear weapons, threaten to use them. And it's often said, well, the NPT doesn't work, it never has worked. Well, no, it hasn't worked in the sense that we have more nuclear weapons, and we have very powerful nuclear weapon states in Russia, China, USA, Britain, and France. And we now have non-signatory nuclear weapons in the possession of North Korea, Israel, Pakistan, and India. But it did also lead to nuclear weapons-free zones around the world, thanks to the African National Congress and the freedom movement in South Africa, when the government of Mandela announced that they would no longer develop, possess, or have anything to do with nuclear weapons in any sort, which meant Africa could become a nuclear weapons-free zone, which it did and it is. Latin America did the same, likewise in Central Asia as well. So don't decry treaties just because they haven't achieved everything they should have achieved. And I've been to a number of NPT review conferences. I think Dave's been to a few as well. We've been at some of them together. They're interesting, fascinating, and deeply frustrating at the same time, because you see all the world's powers there, and then at the end of it, always the big five sort of move in and basically veto whatever agreement is about to be made. We came almost to the point at one of the NPT review conferences of getting agreement for a Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone, which would have included Iran and Israel in that agreement to bring about the possibility of a nuclear weapons free zone in the whole of that area. That was essentially undermined and didn't quite happen. The UK government now wants to claim that it is in fact a global power once again. And indeed, I listened to David Lammy in Parliament recently when he come back from one of his does an awful lot of travelling for somebody who's been
Free.
for a short time. There you go, that's fine. He just kept saying Britain is back.
Back from what?
What's it mean? Back from where? Where to? And so on. What it was really about was following on the Biden assertions, the British assertions, that we are going to be a nuclear power, and John Healey has gone so far as to say that nuclear weapons and holding of nuclear weapons are absolute, a determination and non-negotiable with anybody at any time. Sorry, John, we live in a parliamentary democracy. Governments are accountable to Parliament, not the other way round. And whilst I have no illusions about the current Parliament and its views on nuclear weapons, you cannot have a position where any government says this is non-negotiable. Every government policy has got to be negotiable with an elected Parliament, but they've said that. And the cost of nuclear weapons is, we've worked out, £8,300 for every minute. So we've been going back 10 minutes to 15. So that's £80,000 gone on nuclear weapons, just what I've been talking here. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But that isn't the only reason. The reason is that nuclear weapons are ultimately weapons of mass destruction. And as you remember, during my time as leader of the party, I inherited a party policy that supported the renewal of trial, but to help that policy being developed, I announced I would never use them, which I think seemed to me to be the responsible thing to do, to say that I want to live in a nuclear-free world, therefore there's no circumstance in which I would unleash a nuclear weapon, which knowingly would kill millions of people. And so the idea that we run election campaigns in this country and some kind of virility symbol about how many people we're prepared to kill, I find deeply frightening. But the idea that somehow or other we can debate issues of global peace on the ability to kill millions of people through nuclear weapons. And so, having been a member of CMD all my life and no plans whatsoever to leave, I think we have to keep on with that determination to live in a nuclear weapons-free world. I know it can be achieved, and hence the Global Ban Treaty that's been signed by a majority of the members of the United Nations is something that I think we can hold on to and keep working on and developing. But it does mean being prepared to stand up against the consensus that we're all confronted with all the time. And so, yesterday, I wrote to the Foreign Secretary because it emerged that Britain was mobilising against a UN resolution which is entitled Nuclear War Effects and Scientific Research. And this is a motion submitted by Brazil, Chile, Ireland, Kiribati, Mexico, New Zealand, the Philippines and South Africa, designed to raise awareness amongst future generations of the new challenges to international peace and renew an urgent commitment to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. A scientific survey on it. The British government was proposing, as of yesterday, to vote against this motion, despite the very large number of countries that have supported it. And so I wrote last night with the support of a number of parliamentary colleagues asking that the British government do not vote against this motion, but instead support it, because surely if that group of nations, and they come from all parts, have put forward a serious proposal on investigation about the effects of nuclear weapons and nuclear war, then we should listen to it. Because security, what is security really about? If I have a new next door neighbour, very so often we will get a new next door neighbour, is your immediate reaction to raise the height of your fence, put some razor wire along the top of it, and just so they don't get any ideas above their station, there are a couple of machine guns placed there as well. They can be set off by somebody walking past. And then say to them, I don't mean you any harm, I just need to be secure. Well, I think they might see it slightly differently. They might think, well, actually, my neighbour's lost the plot. And what is all this about? And so, is security the ability to kill your neighbour, to destroy your neighbour? Or is security the ability to get on with your neighbour? And for most people around the world, what is security that they dream of? Food, education, health, housing, environment, sustainability, and the ability to look forward to your children having a better standard of living than you've had, a better life than we've had. That surely is what real security is about. But instead, we are ramping up the arms trade, ramping up expenditure on weapons, and this whole armament policy and the idea that Britain can become once again a global player is really quite extraordinary. Harold Wilson, who I had differences with over his attitude on Vietnam, later on Eric Heffer explained all this to me at enormous length one night. It was enormous length, but it was interesting. He said, well, don't be so harsh on Harold, because he kept the troops out of Vietnam in a very difficult situation. I didn't see that at the time, but I can sort of understand what he was trying to say there. And Wilson was a very contradictory figure in many ways, but he did support the Americans in Vietnam, but did try and reconvene the Geneva Conference jointly with the Soviet Union to bring about a ceasefire, and also hauled Britain back from its East of Suez policy. In other words, he started to bring in the idea that Britain could be a global military power. And that lasted for quite a long time, until other prime ministers came along, particularly David Cameron, Boris Johnson in particular, who said, well, actually, we've got to reassert ourselves as a global power and probably spend a whole lot of money developing new vessels to develop a global naval strategy. And then you ask yourself the question, why is it that what I'm saying tonight would be seen as so deeply controversial by so much of our media? They will not debate peace in any way. And I found it in Parliament raise the question of the possibility of peace between Russia and Ukraine. You're immediately told, well, you're a stool pigeon for the Russians. So no, I'm actually just wanting peace. I want the war to stop. I don't want conscripted soldiers from Russia killing conscripted soldiers from Ukraine and vice versa. There has to be a way forward, and there has to be peace in that conflict. And the media refuse to debate issues of peace. And so why we've produced this book, The Monstrous Anger of the Guns, which is available for you at the back of the room, was we had a discussion in the project, Peace and Justice Project, about what contribution we can make to all of this. And it was inspired by those debates. And Andrew Feinstein was very much part of it. He is a former South African MP in the African National Congress. And he was very close to and very supportive of Nelson Mandela, and they were very close friends. And then when Zuma became the president of South Africa, Andrew started questioning why South Africa's defence expenditure was going up and why they were spending so much money on new planes. Challenged it all, then discovered huge levels of corruption in the sale of the parts for these planes and indeed the construction of them. And so he then eventually got removed by Zuma and ended up living in this country, where he has a wonderful organisation called Shadow World Investigations, which does a great deal of work in exposing the way in which the arms industry operates, the corruption that goes with it, the bribes that are paid, and the incredibly expensive weapons that are produced. So what this book does is analyses the arms trade not from, if you like, the traditional perspective just of Britain and the USA. It also analyses the perspective from the point of view of the global environment, from the point of view of the growth of the arms industry in India, with a chapter in it called Weapons in the Land of Gandhi, and it looks at it from the global perspective. It's the first stab at it. It took a lot of effort to get the book together. We're now promoting the book around the country with discussion meetings all over the country about it, and beginning to say, therefore, challenge the issue of the arms industry, but also raise once again the notion, so bravely raised by shop stewards of Lucas Aerospace many years ago, on an arms conversion strategy, where you can use those absolutely brilliant skills, and they are brilliant skills, that can make these planes, these weapons and everything else, to be used to deal with poverty, hunger, health problems, and of course the environmental issues that we face. And so, whilst the media cover so much of the war in Ukraine, and I'll come on to Gaza in a minute, please don't forget there's a massive war going on in the Sudan at the present time. There are more than 1 million refugees already been driven out of Sudan, most into Egypt, and there is a huge death rate there, and there are plenty of weapons available for both sides in this conflict, and weapons dealers and manufacturers are making an enormous amount of money out of the destruction of life in the Sudan. And there are also wars going on in Congo and in West Papua. The Congo war is a much lower level conflict, but for all that just as brutal. It is a conflict in which militia gangs, who are well funded from somewhere, using relatively high caliber weapons and equipment, are fighting each other in order that somebody else can be exploited to dig out cobalt, which becomes coltan, into our mobile phones. Children being employed to do it. And this mineral mysteriously finds its way into Rwanda, where it is then bought by very respectable mining companies, I use the word carefully, such as Glencore, who then sell those minerals on the global market. And so you see the combination of all those issues. Incredibly poor, grotesquely exploited children in the Congo are digging out that material. The profits of the arms companies are stupendous. In 2023, BAE Systems posted a global profit of $2.7 billion, Lockheed Martin $8.5 billion, Raytheon $650 million, and in 2022, overall revenue from sales of arms and military services by the 100 largest companies in the industry totaled $597 billion of sales during that year. So what we're trying to do in this book is challenge the notions behind the arms trade. And Laura Alvarez, who's at the back there and was responsible for coordinating and putting the book together on behalf of the Peace and Justice Project, wrote an afterword in it in which she raised the 5 main points about the book. 1, to raise awareness about the dangers of the arms industry and consequence of weapons in the world, because in the end it could destroy humanity. To push for the development of sustainable green industries which would benefit human life and the environment. To help to change the narrative pushed by the mainstream media and governments around the world. Demand that governments stop increasing defence spending, which in the UK is planned to rise to 2.5% of GDP, and instead invest in public services that benefit and protect the many. And finally, to campaign internationally for a future where everyone can live collectively in a world of peace, equality and justice. Okay, they're big asks and big demands. But if we don't make these statements and don't start this work, then how are we ever going to make any progress on it? And so, I wanted to say something, if I may, about what's happening in Gaza. Tomorrow we have the 16th national demonstration in Britain to try and demand a ceasefire in Gaza. 41,000 people have been killed in Gaza already. And those are the deaths that have been recorded and corroborated by the UN. So when the BBC keeps saying this is the Hamas-run health authority, these figures have been corroborated by others, 41,000. That's irrespective of the numbers that are going to be found under the rubble. And the Lancet says they estimate the death toll is going to come out of almost 200,000 people. That's in a population of 2 million. 200,000 dead in a population of 2 million. That's 10% of the entire population will be dead by the end of August. And more bombs have already been dropped on Gaza that were dropped on Iraq during the whole of the Iraq War. And it's a very small place. I've been to Gaza many times. If there were no roadblocks or anything else, you'd get from one end to the other in less than an hour. It's not a big place. And on top of that, 97,000 have been wounded. 157 Palestinian journalists have been killed. Because there's very few journalists from anywhere else in Gaza. And I was talking to some doctors who have been working in Gaza who said, well, basically there is no functioning hospital in Gaza that you could call a functioning hospital. There are places that are labelled as hospitals that are bomb damaged, limited equipment and limited ability to help people, but they're trying their best. And the humanitarian crisis is unbelievable, with now famine in the northern part of Gaza and children dying in wholly preventable conditions like diarrhea. And that is just killing people. And the legal process that's been taken is quite extraordinary. I was invited by the government of South Africa to go to the International Court of Justice for the hearing when they made the application against Israel under the Genocide Convention. And it was fascinating. I was sitting there in a gallery of small numbers. It's a very small gallery, watching the proceedings going on. And the South African presentation was brilliant, brilliantly put together, very legally argued as well as humanly argued. And I was just sort of pinching myself thinking, wow, South Africa that suffered under apartheid from 1948 to 1990 is now speaking up for the rest of the world and doing this thing, and I think we should just say thank you. So, the decisions came out that there was genocidal acts being undertaken. There's also been condemnation from the International Criminal Court against individuals such as Netanyahu. And there's also been condemnation under the Geneva Convention about the powers and the activities of occupying powers. It's dangerously easy to say, well, this is all about Israel versus Palestine. Yes, at one level that's true. It's the Israeli military trying to destroy Palestine. Every life lost means that a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a cousin, an aunt, and uncle suffer because of it. That applies to the hostages as just as much as to anybody else. The loss of life in war is an utter and irreversible pain for those that suffer it. And there are people in Israel who very bravely oppose the policies of their government and demand and want a ceasefire. And my good friend Ofer Kassim, who is a member of the Knesset, who's been suspended from the Knesset because of his activities opposing the occupation, is, I'm pleased to say, going to be making a visit to this country in a couple of weeks' time, and obviously we'll be having meetings myself with him. And Britain then proposed, after a lot of pressure because of all the marches and demonstrations, that there would be, we were demanding a ceasefire and an arms embargo. And then David Lammy turned up in Parliament and announced they were going to suspend 30 arms licences. He was unable to say what they are, and said that Britain is against the breaches of international humanitarian law. Well, I'm pleased about that. But I need a bit more evidence that they're going to do something about it, because there are still 300 licenses in operation which are making, crucially, the parts that make the F-35 jets fly. We're witnessing the genocide of people in Gaza. We're witnessing an increase in occupation of the West Bank, and we're witnessing an attempt to drive the entire population of Gaza out of the Gaza Strip into Egypt, where Egypt obviously does not want it. Some countries have managed to stop selling arms to Israel completely. We, unfortunately, have not been able to do that yet. And so, sometimes poetry is more powerful than words in these situations. So I get sent quite a lot of poetry, as you might imagine. I got sent a poem by Emily Tootle about the arms trade and her activities in opposing the war in Gaza. I won't read it all, it's quite a long poem. But I'll just read this part. Now, I can't speak out on behalf of our grandkids, but I hope they call bullshit on that excuse. Their futures are uncertain already, as it is, and you're there, tightening the noose, because injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And what we're seeing is pervertedly strange, but we have an unprecedented opportunity now to make actual, meaningful change. We scream, lay down your arms. Children lay in the arms of their traumatized fathers and mothers. Too bold to dismiss it, our own government complicit to the murder of our sisters and brothers. Because in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. The string of humanity ties us all together. It's twirled and curled around all the world, and we're bound to each other forever. My ears still ring, my eyes still sting, my soul sings loud and true. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And sweet child, we love and remember you. It's a beautiful poem. Well done her for writing it. So, on the arms industry and its effects on the environment, this is often simply ignored. So it's just, the arms industry can't be a big emitter. And in reality, as I was saying, the bombing of Gaza is intense and huge. And the emissions generated during the first 2 months of the bombardment of Gaza are greater than the annual carbon footprint of more than 20 of the world's most climate vulnerable nations. That's just from the military activities in Gaza on the effect on the global climate. And it's 20% of all environmental degradation globally is due to military-related activities, much of which is not included in the measurements given by national governments when they're negotiating at COP and other places on the environmental effects of this. And the United States Department of Defense is the world's largest institutional consumer of petroleum and the world's largest institutional producer of greenhouse gases, producing over 3,685 million metric tons of CO2 between 1975 and 2018. Real security is a habitable planet. And in our book, we've got a chapter by Stuart Parkinson on the environmental effects of the arms industry. And I want to just quote one bit from it, if I may. If you'll just bear with me on the page. In the chapter, Stuart points out that a passenger car produces 110 grams of CO2 per kilometre. A US armoured truck, a Humvee, produces 10 times that on its normal travelling round. An F-35 Lightning jet produces 10,000 grams per kilometre. And the Queen Elizabeth class UK aircraft carrier produces 500,000 per kilometre that it travels around the world. The environmental damage being done by the arms industry and the use of arms is absolutely huge. And what Stuart also points out is the environmental damage that's done by the detritus of war, by landmines that are not cleared away, and there are still people in southern Iraq suffering the cancerous effects of the use of depleted uranium in 1991 by Britain and other countries. And so I think we need just to bear a lot of this in mind. The consequences of war are many. the numbers of people displaced because of war are absolutely huge, and there's something deeply moving about talking to people in Calais who are desperate and prepared to give everything they've got in order to get into a dangerous dinghy across the channel and try and get to Britain. The same is going on in Libya, people trying to get to Lampedusa, the same is going on in Turkey, people trying to get into Greece. And I've been to Calais on a number of occasions, talked to people there, talked to people that have travelled, they don't really know how, but by a combination of truck and so forth, from Afghanistan to Calais, trying to get to Britain. I don't know what the total figure is, but this country spent an awful lot of money prosecuting a war in Afghanistan, has left behind unbelievable levels of poverty, human rights abuse, and a lack of any secure feeling in the future. So I said to this one man, well, it's really dangerous trying to cross the channel. Are you really sure that's a good idea? I absolutely do not recommend it. If there's any other way, stay for Israel's Island or whatever else, take it if you possibly can. And he said, I've been bombed in Afghanistan, I've been shot up on the route, I've been beaten up, I've been tortured, I've been abused, I've been the most hateful things said to me and done to me during this journey. I'll risk anything to get away from this degree of hell. He's a victim of war, just like the people back home in Afghanistan. And then we look at the numbers of people that are seeking and obtain a relative place of safety in different countries of the world. It's not Europe. It's not massive numbers of people coming into Europe, despite whatever the media says. It is Bangladesh, which has taken in 1 million Rohingya people. It is Egypt, which has taken in the recent past, over 2 million people from a combination of Yemen, Syria, and Sudan. And you go around the world and you'll see it's the southern countries with the least resources and the most difficult circumstances that are taking in the vast majority of refugees. There are 70 million people around the world. And so the disgusting anti-migrant rhetoric that the far right promoted in this country during August and September, and are still trying to whenever they get a chance to do it, condemning refugees, maybe instead they should condemn those that have gone to and started and promoted these wars that have created the refugees in the first place. And also just remember, today's desperate asylum seeker and refugee in the future is our next door neighbour, is our doctor, our nurse, our lawyer, our engineer, our train driver, our bus driver, our road worker, and everything else. They are human beings trying to survive in a difficult world. And I hate the way the language is used against people that are trying to make their lives somehow or other that they can live. I think future histories of the 21st century are going to look askance at the way in which the political establishment of both parties in this past election and since have just lined up to condemn people who are desperately looking for a place of safety. We can do better than that. We can be humanitarians and human at the same time as being practical. And let's just remember that those people going through this hell are actually decent people just trying to survive in a very difficult world. And so what I wanted to conclude is with some thoughts about global alignments. All of us in this room grew up during the Cold War. I'm looking at the age of you. Hands up those who were born after the Cold War. Yeah, well done you guys, You brought an end to it, obviously. But you do understand that the whole atmosphere of British politics, of defence thinking, and so on, was this Cold War mentality that you have to have what I call MAD, the mutually assured destruction syndrome, where you build up so much military capability that the Soviet Union is going to be frightened, and they're going to then build up their mutual capability. Well, one arms industry promotes another, and all the arms that are being poured into Ukraine at the moment. Don't think the Russian arms industry isn't on Putin's neck all the time, offering to make more weapons and more bombs. Don't think the Indian arms industry, the Chinese and others, don't have a huge self-interest in all of this. Surely it's about the voice for peace and the voice for resolution of these conflicts that is so important. I don't actually support what Russia has done in Ukraine in any way. I just want to see the war come to an end and the killing to stop as a result of it. And so I think the quote I want to give you for the UN General Secretary, who spoke to the BRICS Summit this week. Now remember that the BRICS Summit is not just the new kids on the block. It is the world's biggest countries that have come together to form the BRICS alliance, which is, if you like, in competition with the NATO-aligned countries, although bizarrely Turkey is both in NATO and in BRICS, but there's like many contradictions in this world. And what Antonio Guterres said when he spoke there was, no single group and no single country can act alone or in isolation. It takes a community of nations working as one global family to address global challenges. Challenges like the rising number of conflicts, the devastation of climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss, rising inequalities and lingering poverty and hunger, a debt crisis that threatens to smother plans for the future of many vulnerable people. He then went on to say we need peace in Gaza, we need peace in Lebanon, we need peace in Ukraine, we need peace in Sudan. And so he tried to uphold the values of the UN Charter, which all countries signed up for in 1948. And so I want to say to you all, Olof Palme said, for us, democracy is a question of human dignity. This includes the political liberties, the right to freely express our views, the right to criticise and to influence opinion. It embraces the right to health and work, to education and social security. I think we should honour his life work by doing all we can to bring all those things about. And not be afraid of upsetting the consensus in Parliament, the consensus in the media, and the consensus that is too often there in academia as well. We make no criticism of the budget that's gone in the last few days on the question of arms expenditure. Britain has just committed itself to increasing arms expenditure by £30 billion a year by 2030. That is more or less £700 million a week more on arms expenditure in this country. You could build an awful lot of hospitals with £700 million quid. You could employ an awful lot of nurses and teachers. You could do an awful lot about ending the two-child benefit cap and the disgusting poverty that large families too often live in our society. And global weapons expenditure, according to the Stockholm Institute, is $2,443 billion a year, of which $116 billion comes from the USA, $300 billion from China, and then descending down to Britain, who's well up there in the league at $76 billion a year. We need to move the dial. Move the dial on debate, move the dial on analysis, and move the dial on the teaching of history in our schools. Are we to bequeath to our children a world of nuclear weapons, war, environmental destruction, and incredible levels of inequality between the super rich and the desperately poor? Or are we to strive for a world of peace and justice and equality? And so, in honour of all those that worked so hard for peace in the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, all those demands and struggles are just as relevant. But these days, we do have the ability to communicate with each other in a way that none of our older campaigners ever have. We have the ability to promote the values of peace. It's just up to us to make sure that there are voices there for peace, for justice, and above all, that precious commodity that we're so desperately in need of, hope. Well, thank you very much.